Hello everyone, Archana is here. Welcome to the 15th session of presentation ICSE Class 9 Paper 2 Literature in English. In today's session, let us deal with the prose An Angel in Disguise written by T.S. Arthur. About the author, T.S. Arthur was a famous 19th century American writer who was born in 6th June 1809. So he was the editor and author of fiction and non-fiction works such as 10 Nights in a Bar Room. So 10 Nights was the biggest and most successful of Arthur's career, but equally he was a great editor and publisher. So his full name was Timothy Shea Arthur. So he was weak in health since childhood. Therefore, his mother took up the job of a teacher so that she could read him the Bible stories and tell him the many tales of a father who was an officer in the Revolutionary War. So in 1839, he began editing the Baltimore Merchant. So he soon became a well-known writer on morals, advice, suggestions, compassion, values and ideas. So he died in the year 1885. An Angel in Disguise, a short story written by the popular 19th century American author cum editor, that is Timothy Shea Arthur, in 1851 is literally based on the theme Love Can Win Over Anything in the World. So the story is a beautiful, heart-touching. So the author has contributed greatly towards social and moral responsibilities required of people by writing a number of newspaper articles, poems, stories and novels. Arthur wrote stories with compassion and sensitivity. So in this story too, he describes the transformative and restorative power of selfless love. So the story basically is about a poor, miserable, wretched child who turns out to be an angel for Thompson family, a poor woman who is hated throughout her life by almost all the people of the village is now surrounded by the same people. When she dies in a drunken state on the threshold of her own house, she dies in front of her three children who included two daughters and a son. So the village people take pity on these children. It relates to the advent of Maggie, a frail young orphan, into the lives of wheelwright, that is Joe Thompson, and his wife Jane. The child's presence had a miraculous effect on the lives of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. So they thought they are helping her by adopting her. However, Maggie turned out to be the one who took away the negativity from their lives and brought them happiness. Let's deal with the story. There lived an unnamed poor woman who had been disliked and mocked at and criticized by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. But now, what happened? This poor woman dies from excess alcohol consumption. So she had been an outcast in her village due to her addiction, but her death brought the villagers sympathy, so they arranged a proper funeral for her. The woman had three children. First one, John, Kate, and Maggie. So, a farmer decided to adopt the eldest son, John, who is 12 years old, thinking he can help him in his field work. And Mrs. Ellie adopts Kate, who is a few years too young to work in any factory, saying she is much undisciplined. The youngest child, Maggie, gets left alone because of her health. When she was much younger, she fell from a window and the fall had damaged her spine. Hence, she was permanently bedridden. Everyone suggests sending her to the poorhouse, that is orphanage. Poorhouse, but no one makes an effort to do something about it. After the funeral, everyone leaves without even a glance at Maggie, but Joe Thompson lingers. He thinks about Maggie. Poor girl, and she cannot do her work herself, and she is bedridden. How she is going to survive? So, Joe Thompson works as a wheelwright in the village and makes wooden wheels for wagons and carts. Though he looks to be a rough man, Joe is kind and loves children, but he and his wife are unable to have kids. Maggie sees all the villagers living and also notices that Joe is still standing outside her house. She calls out for him and pleads him not to leave her alone. Even though Joe knows that his wife, Jane Thompson, won't be very happy to see Maggie, he carries the kid to his home. As he had guessed, his wife is not happy to see her and asks him when he is going to get rid of her. In answer, he says that he had read many times in the Bible that those who help children will not be unrewarded. Joe also requests her to put aside her heart's bitterness and see how cruel life is for Maggie, motherless, homeless, and permanently bedridden. Though Mrs. Thompson doesn't say anything to her husband, her heart softens a little towards Maggie. Joe tells his wife that he will make arrangements tomorrow to send Maggie to the poorhouse and leaves for work. After dusk, when he comes home, he sees from the window that Mrs. Thompson is sitting by Maggie's bed and they are talking, or rather, Maggie is answering Mrs. Thompson's questions. He feels it is best to not bring up the topic of Maggie himself, so he doesn't say anything further on the subject. He goes to see Maggie and they talk for a while. While having supper, Mrs. Thompson asks her husband what he is going to do with the child. In answer to which Joe tells that she is to go to the poorhouse tomorrow. Mrs. Thompson doesn't say anything, but Joe remains or knows that years of bitterness has finally started fading away. She takes food for Maggie into her small chamber and waits for her to finish it. Maggie's innocence, sweetness, unconditional love, and gratitude for them fills the void that had formed in Mrs. Thompson's heart. She tells Joe that she wants to keep Maggie for a couple of days more, but that day never comes. They remain together forever as a family. How the little child melts her stone heart is what the story is all about. Let's conclude the story. So there lived a poor woman in a village. She had 3 children. She was hated by everyone in the village. She was often despised, scoffed, and spoken angrily about by people in her neighborhood. One day she fell upon her door on a drunken fit and passed away right in front of her children. So the old woman left behind three children, that is John, Kate, and Maggie. Despite the hatred for the woman, everyone in the village pitied the children as there was nobody to take care of them. So the old woman's death roused the neighbors' pity and they arranged for her burial. Everyone came forward to help the children. John, a 12-year-old boy, was the eldest and was adopted by Farmer Jones. Mrs. Ellis was looking for a maid, so she adopted Kate, a girl between 10 and 11, whom she could groom easily to be of help. So, the youngest of the three kids was Maggie, who had injured her spine 2 years ago and was crippled for life. So she was not wanted by anyone. However, the ladies in the neighborhood brought her discarded clothes and cleaned her after the death of her mother. So Maggie was not able to do anything on her own owing to her spine injury. So Maggie's innocent looks attracted everyone, but no one dared to take her in. After a lot of discussion, it was decided that Maggie should be sent to the poorhouse. So it was a sad place for a child to be, but for Maggie, it would be like a blessing where she could be taken care of, kept clean, given healthy food, and be under medical observation whenever necessary. So, on the day of the burial, John and Kate were taken away by their new families, but poor little Maggie was left alone. The siblings bid each other a sobbing farewell, and Maggie was left alone and ignored by most of the villagers. Joe Thompson, who was a wheelwright, was one of the last people living. He felt it was cruel to leave behind Maggie in that state. When he entered the hut, Maggie was lying up straight and looked at him with pleading eyes. Maggie was feeling sad, so she requested Mr. Thompson to not leave her alone. Joe Thompson wrapped her gently in clean cloths, lifted her in his arms, and took her to his home. As Joe held Maggie close to his chest, he formed a bond of affection with her. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson did not have any children. Joe was worried about the reaction of his wife. Over the years, she had turned bitter and unkind on seeing her husband bring a deceased child home. Mrs. Thompson grew angry. She kept questioning Joe about why he did not drop her to the poorhouse directly. Normally, Joe kept quiet when his wife Jane Thompson got angry or had a difference of opinion with him. But this time, he kept a firm countenance and explained his point of view. He informed his wife that Maggie was left alone in the hut by all the villagers. Her siblings were adopted by Farmer Jones and Mrs. Ellis. But nobody wanted to pick up the poor child. Everyone decided that she be dropped at the poorhouse, but nobody was willing to take her there. Joe said that she needed to be carried to the poorhouse and he could take her there. It would require a couple of days, and till then, Joe wanted her to stay at their house. He requested Jane to be kind and polite with her since she had suffered a great loss of her mother and was separated from her siblings. He wanted his wife to consider Maggie's loneliness, her pain and sorrow, and he asked his wife to take care of Maggie for some time. Jane Thompson considered her husband's request and looked after the poor and suffering child. She was very kind to her and she realized her pain of losing her mother and being separated from her siblings. Years of loneliness had made her hard hearted and ill tempered, but she confronted little Maggie and took care of her. So that night, when Joe came home after completing his work, he noticed that the little chamber where he had placed Maggie was illuminated, filled with light. So it caught Joe's attention. Jane was sitting beside Maggie, talking to her. This was a positive sign for Joe. He observed both of them and was relieved that everything was fine. There were no signs of bitterness. Joe went into the chamber to meet Maggie. He had a little conversation with Maggie. He asked her about her health and if she had any pain. Maggie was very grateful to him. So she pleasantly answered all the questions. Her answers reflected sweetness and thankfulness. Jane has also developed tender feelings for Maggie. At the time of supper, she told Joe that Maggie was very weak and therefore should not be sent to the poorhouse for a couple of days. So Joe considered Jane's thought and he did not see the guardians of the poor that day or any other day in the future. They never sent Maggie away, so she had become a part of their house and was taken care of as their own child. So she became an angel in disguise for the childless Thompsons. She brought back the happiness and fulfillment. Now they had someone to shower their love, care, and affection. Joe Thompson was happy as his house was no more a dull and sad place. So they lived their lives happily and with love. So, students, here we have winded up the prose. Thank you all.